I'm delighted to be here this evening.
I'm just going to pour over you, sorry,
Yeah,
Sam.
pour away. To talk to Nigella about her new book, Simply Nigella, and just chat about life, really. So we thought we'd start by talking about the process of book writing, but writing cookery books in particular. So you've spent the last year in the kitchen.
And lying in bed with my laptop writing. I think that, for me, writing a book is it's not actually a very linear process, in the sense that I get an idea for what a book might be, but I don't get that idea until I've been cooking quite a bit. So sometimes I think I might be writing one book, but then I'm cooking and something else emerges. And generally it's because what emerges is what I'm cooking just to feed me and my family. I think it's difficult. I don't like to write down a recipe until I've cooked it several times. And I feel I need to think about what that recipe means. I mean, what it means to me, why it's there, because it's not really just good enough that you can cook something and it will taste good. It has to have, to me, it has to be connected to other things that are in the book, and I have to feel I want to cook it again and again and again. And I think that's, so when I've cooked everything, and then in my head I start getting the shape of a book. And once I've got the shape of a book, then I rapidly make it far too large. And then, so for example, this book, which is pretty long, you know, I had to take 25 recipes out. And then, of course, the actual writing, I do it, I file, because I'm always late, I file a bit like a journalist, because I used to be a journalist. So I do chapter by chapter, and I still call it filing rather than...
And no filing until there's a deadline right here.
Yeah, exactly, no filing until there's a deadline, and, you know, they're editing some chapters as I carry on. But so I write all the recipes, and then I tend to go back and write the introduction to the chapter once I've written all the recipes with their introductions, because there's quite a lot of writing involved. And I often think, you know, I work out what I think by writing. So were I to write the introduction to the chapter before I actually wrote all the recipes, then it wouldn't be the right way around, because the recipes hadn't begun to become their own ideas, if you know what I mean.
Have you got any superstitions when you're writing a book?
I don't have any superstitions, but I have found that certain books get written in different places, and it can be quite suited to the sort of books they are. So How to Eat and Kitchen and Feast I wrote in a closed-off study. And Express I wrote in, you know, sort of on a table surrounded by other people, and because my office is at home, so, you know, it's what might be where I'd be sitting doing my normal work. And it reminded me a bit about being back in a newspaper, when you have to get used to writing with a lot of noise and other people and talking. And that in a way quite felt right, because I think that the book was all about express cooking, and that in a way I couldn't linger over everything when I was surrounded by noise. And this, although I did do a bit in a sort of study that doubles as my yoga studio, that's off my bedroom, I found that I did do an awful lot, just, as I say, propped up on my bed with many pillows, many bits of paper with notes on them, my cooking notebook, and a laptop in front of me. Very bad for the back, but that's what I did.
There's really an autobiographical strand, isn't there, in your books, if you go back through, well, right back to the beginning, really. It really feels especially true of Simply Nigella. Did you feel that?
I don't think it's especially true. I think that I can't write except in that way. And I think I certainly mean, by autobiographical, I feel that is in the sense of a diary, not in a confessional sense. But I feel that my books chart my life. So in the same way that How to Eat has got a chapter on weaning and feeding, you know, babies and toddlers. and it goes on, and
none of
then
that
and I've done all that. You know, Feast has got a chapter on, you know, I think it was Teen Feasts or whatever that I did. But I think that for me a recipe is, you know, as I've said, you know, a highly charged autobiographical form. It comes from a stage in my life and it means something to me. And even though obviously I don't stop cooking certain recipes when that time has passed, it puts me, when I cook those things, it in a way it reminds me of the past. And sometimes when I look at my books, it's a bit like looking at a photograph album. And now it's certainly true that in some of my books there are pictures, say, of my children when they're younger, not very much. But nevertheless, I so remember the making of each book. I remember what kitchen I was in. I remember what we ate while I was testing all the recipes, even the recipes that didn't make it into the book. So because of that, they just do feel, they feel very much like chunks of my life. I think that has to be, otherwise they don't, I wouldn't feel that the books belong to me or that the food was my food, and I really can only write about my food.
Did you treat recipes like that before you started writing cookery books? Were they always slightly, did they always have that personal kind of journal sense to them?
Well, I think they did in the sense that writing for me is a way of that I connect with elements of my past. I'm not sure that I thought of I don't really think I, you know, cooked or thought in terms of recipes before I started writing about food. And when I first started writing about food, it was more narrative and it was a discussion. And then I found I moved into recipes, sometimes still within a body of text, but then I did feel that actually I wanted to discuss the recipe in a way that made sense to the reader as well, which meant writing it down as a recipe. But you know, I think that one of the reasons I started writing about food, and it's only one of the reasons, and there are lots of reasons, none of them were planned, were that my mother and one of my sisters died very young, and I felt it was very important for me, before I even got into doing a book, to remember, and obviously there was no question of forgetting, but to remember, or memorialise is better, to remember them in a way that seems so important, which is through their food and through the food I ate with them. So I think that in that sense, a recipe for chicken is never just a recipe for chicken. It's remembering the way my mother would cook her chicken, or the way, remembering what, you know, eating round the old blue Formica table. And all that sort of thing seems to me that cooking has to be that. And I suppose, you know, it became very important for me that my children could eat my mother's food, even though obviously they never got a chance to meet her. But I think that cooking is always a form of connection. I think you feel connected to either someone who's given you the recipe, or in my case, as my mother never wrote down recipes or cooked from recipes, or you're connected to the person who fed you that food, even if you change it. And you're also connected, I feel very connected with myself when I cook, and with other people, because you're thinking of feeding other people or feeding yourself. And that, I like that moment for me of, you know, I started going into a new age now, but, you know, you feel connected with, it's my bit of being connected with the earth, since I'm an entirely urban creature. So, you know, chopping up an onion or, you know, holding a bulb of garlic is my bit of communion with nature.
That's as close as you're getting. Yeah. Was your mother your formative influence on your cooking, would you say?
My mother was a formative influence on my cooking, but partly because, you know, I cooked a lot with her, and she was a great believer in child labour. And I had a sister, Thomasina, who was 16 months younger than me, and she used to prop us. You'd prop us up by the stove. We'd had an old world, so no, it was a new world, it was called New World gas range. And she would, you know, put us on these awfully sort of wibbly-wobbly chairs, and we'd be stirring things, I mean, over high heat. And we taught how to make sauces. And there was there was always a very tense moment. So we had to make the mayonnaise, and one of us would have to whisk the egg yolks and one would pour in the oil. And even though I always had tried to do the whisking of the egg yolks, because even though I was never fast enough, and the really dangerous job was pouring in the oil because you had to do it so slowly, and I'm incredibly clumsy, so it was always a bit of a catastrophe as too much went in. But then, of course, I learned how to rectify that and start again. So it was formative in that I have inherited her impatient style, but also that spontaneity of just wanting to do what I'm doing and do it perhaps in the fastest way possible, rather than maybe the most elegant sometimes. But I feel I don't cook exactly the same food. I think it's a way of cooking and an approach to cooking. But she was much more, well, you know, however much you think you're not influenced by fashion and your age, you are. So her cooking was much more French influenced, you know, more sauces.
White sauce.
Every sauce, white sauce, hollandaise, béarnaise. I mean, we all could cook them all. And that's useful, but I don't, but I think I was also very influenced by my maternal grandmother.
The grandmother who couldn't cook. Is that the one?
No. That was both my grandmothers could cook, but my paternal grandmother said after a while she got vertigo in the kitchen, so then she didn't cook. But she did have very bright wallpaper. No, but both of them could cook. No, my maternal grandmother, I did cook with quite a bit, but she cooked in a very different way because she cooked with recipes. Right. And also she went in much more for certain sort of fashions, and she'd tear recipes out of magazines and cook from those. So I think it's quite good to realise that there are various different ways of cooking. And actually the real treat when I was young is that both my grandmothers made, would cook pudding and sweet things, whereas we never had anything like that at home.